This video was brought to you by us, Slidebean. Make beautiful slide presentations in no time. Get 1 free month by signing up at slidebean.com/YouTube. One of the most common questions we get is how to calculate a market size slide. After so many years of this, I believe I can come up with a decent market size estimation, certainly much better than I used to. But in order to explain this in the best possible way, we've invited Steve Barsh, one of the managing partners at Dream Adventures, and also an angel investor, to tell us all about it.
Hi, let's start with some basic definitions. So what's TAM, or total addressable market? What is it? It's the total market demand, meaning all revenue, for a product or a service. Now, sometimes people also talk about SAM, which is the service addressable market, which is the segment of the TAM targeted by your products or services within a certain area, like a geographic region. Now, I'm not a big fan of things like SAM and SOM, so in this episode, we're just gonna focus on TAM. We'll talk a little bit about how go-to-market strategy can impact TAM, but we're gonna focus on TAM. So what's the first big mistake that we see startup after startup make about TAM? And that is they take a top-down approach. They say, it's a huge market, and if I just get 1% of the market, it's enormous. And our answer to that is no, absolutely not. You cannot do a top-down estimate of TAM. You're gonna have to go bottom-up. You're gonna have to document your assumptions and show how your TAM comes together. So a little further, what is TAM not? These are some other big mistakes that we see startups make all the time. Your TAM is not the size of the problem. So we see a lot with health tech companies we work with. Well, if you look at the size of the opioid crisis in the United States, it's a $100 billion a year problem. That's the size of the problem, not the TAM. So another big problem that we see is people talk about TAM, but they talk about the size of the entire market, and you don't even exist yet. So it's not the size of the entire market, it's the size of your market. So let's give some examples of that. How big is the market when you're trying to calculate TAM? So we see a lot of urban tech and prop tech companies, and they'll say the CAD and BIM market, building information management. It's a multi-billion-dollar market, right, but your product doesn't even exist yet. Or they'll say the cybersecurity market is enormous. If you look at the TAM, it's a $250 billion market. That's billion with a B. If we just get 1% of that, we'll be a $2.5 billion a year cybersecurity company. Yeah, that's great, but you can't do TAM top down. So let me give you some other examples of when we see people make mistakes. Like imagine you were making ski goggles and people say, if you look at the size, the total addressable market of the US ski and snowboard industry, it's $3.3 billion a year in 2020. You make a ski goggle, that's not your total addressable market, that's ski resort's total addressable market. Or you say, well, we're making a cup holder that fits in Priuses and Toyota sells $6 billion of Priuses every single year. That's not your TAM, that's Toyota's TAM. So you're gonna have to do a bottoms-up calculation. None of this top-down, none of this 1% of. So that TAM calculation that we're gonna start to get into is gonna be the number of customers times your price. It's simple, but there's a few big traps in that simplicity and mistakes that we see startups after startup make. This week alone, I've probably talked to a dozen startups, and out of 12 startups, 11 out of 12 made these classic mistakes besides the top-down mistakes. So let's go into that and break down and give you some examples. So when you say the number of customers, it's times the number of customers, the first question I want to understand is, well, where are your customers? Are you talking about the US market, the European market, the global market? You're gonna have to cite your data, but when you calculate the number of customers, what is that total number? What is the market that you're addressing? The next question is going to be around price. Remember, we're saying that TAM is the number of customers times the price. And the question is, how do you know that your price is accurate? Now, if you're a little later stage startup and you're raising a Series A or a Series B, maybe you've been doing some selling and you have accurate pricing. We see a lot of early stage startups and their pricing is highly inaccurate. So if you're trying to calculate your total addressable market, number of customers times the price, and one of those two numbers is way off, the number of customers is way off, or the price is way off, your total addressable market is unrealistic. So big point around pricing. Have you tested and de-risked your pricing? Because otherwise it's an assumption. Let me give you an example of a mistake I saw a startup make the other day. They did their TAM, they showed the number of customers times the price, and I said, wait, $5,000 per customer per month? Where did you get that price from? And they said, well, that's what a competitor charges today. And I said, well, is that what you're gonna charge? No, we're gonna charge 1/10 of that. well, then your TAM is going to be a tenth the size. You can't use a competitor's price. You have to use your price. Customers times the accurate price that's been de-risked, it's not an assumption, you're going to get towards TAM. The other thing we're going to talk about again and again is when you're showing that TAM, and if you're building on a slide using a product like Slidebean, you're going to need to document your assumptions on your slide. Like your high school math teacher used to say, show your work. So we like to see it, dream it, and it's great to use a product like Slidebean to show this as well. When you show your TAM calculation, put footnotes on the bottom of the slide as to where that number of customers came from, where that pricing comes from, and document it and show your work. So let's talk through 2 real-world examples and show you how this works. Let's do a cybersecurity company first. We meet with a lot of cybersecurity companies, hands are waving all the time at how big the market is. So let's say I was meeting with an early stage founder and startup, and they said, look, we've got a Swiss Army knife type cybersecurity product. It crushes nearly every cybersecurity problem, major problem that a company would have. So the market's huge. Cybersecurity is a $1 trillion problem, and the market size is $250 billion annually. That's billion with a B. Well, there's an example, number 1, where the startup just told me the size of the problem. I don't need to know the size of the problem. I need to know their TAM. And they're about to go down that top-down approach where it's a $250 billion market, but they barely exist in it. So how would you break that down? So what we're building is almost like a Swiss Army knife type of cybersecurity product that crushes nearly every problem a company would typically have. The market's huge. Cybersecurity is a $1 trillion global problem, and the market size is $250 billion a year annually. So I might drill into that startup and say, every company? And they'd say, well, not every company. It's really tuned for financial institutions. So you start drilling down on that. Wait, all financial institutions? You mean credit card companies, banks, insurance companies, mortgage companies? And we see this again and again. And the cybersecurity startup comes back and says, well, it doesn't really address this for insurance companies and credit card and mortgage. It's really fine-tuned for bank-specific issues, cybersecurity problems that happen at banks. So I might come back and say, wait, big banks like JP Morgan, Citibank, Chase, HSBC, they could come back and say something, well, no, actually, it's really good for banks that don't have a CISO, a Chief Information Security Officer. It's really fine-tuned and great for banks that have like a VP of IT or CIO, but they don't have a dedicated security function within IT. That's really where our value proposition shines. So a startup comes back and says something like, we're like a security team in a box for small to mid-sized banks. That's our sweet spot. That's where our Swiss Army knife cybersecurity solution really works. We keep digging into that more. Wait, US banks, South America, Mexico, is this a regional issue? Is this a global issue? And we've done things like this at Dream It, and you hear people come back, well, we know it really works for North America, South America, and Europe. We don't have any idea about Asia or Africa. Okay, so then we're gonna sit there and say to a startup like that, if they're trying to calculate TAM, and just first get a grip on the customers. So you're gonna need to figure out how many medium and small banks there are in North America, South America, and Europe. Asia and Africa are gonna be icing on the cake, but the total number of customers that you're going to focus on, particularly your go-to-market strategy in calculating TAM, is going to be those target customers that really fit the criteria of what you're looking for in the geographic regions you're looking for. So as you think about all of these things, if you think about your target customer, the target geography, this is how you're going to start to calculate what the real number of customers are for your particular TAM. Now remember, we said TAM is number of customers times the pricing. So what's the pricing? So I might say to a startup, so tell me what your pricing is. Well, we think it's going to be around $10,000. Well, $10,000 per what unit of measure? Per month, per user, per bank, per branch? Again, we see these problems again and again. What's that unit of measure? And a lot of this gets back to willingness to pay, or WTP. What is that customer willing to pay, and what is that unit of measure that you're using when calculate pricing? So now what you're going to do, let's say they came back, well, it's $10,000 per branch, not just per customer, but these are banks, and banks have branches. So they could come back and say, well, it's $10,000 per branch per month for small to medium-sized banks in North America, South America, and Europe. Okay, now you can come together and calculate what your real TAM is, the number of customers times the pricing, and think it through. And oh, by the way, if you remember when we started with this example, it's a $250 billion a year market. All of a sudden, your $250 billion a year is $250 million a year. And you might be thinking, I was wondering why I wasn't getting meetings with investors when I'd send them my pitch deck, because they were laughing at your TAM slide because your calculation is way, way off, because you're not thinking realistically about the customers you're going after, the customers you're targeting, and what your real pricing is. By the way, the example I just did of the cybersecurity company, at Dreamit, we call that narrowing of the TAM funnel, right? Where we start with this really big TAM, but the startup is unrealistic around who their real target customers are. And the more you drill down, the more you think critically about who your true target customers are, the narrower and narrower your funnel gets to what your real market size is. It's a common mistake we see. So just make sure as you think through what your TAM is, you're talking about your real target customer. We find also people are way off about pricing. This is for both pre-seed, seed, and Series A companies. You need to nail this because an investor wants to understand how big a market you're going into. So realize we see most startups are wrong about both things, number of customers and pricing. And if you're multiplying two wrong numbers times each other, you have a huge problem on your hands. Your total addressable market is ridiculous and not realistic for what you're looking to do. Let's think through Slidebean, right? What would we think about if we were talking to Caya and going through this same drill? So I would ask Slidebean as a startup or as a company, who's your target customer? For instance, is it all startups like angel and seed startups? Is it Series A, B, C, and D level startups? For instance, are Uber and Airbnb going to use Slidebean as they're doing their mezzanine round raising $4 billion? Probably not. Like a lot of great companies, a lot of great startups, they know where to focus. Slidebean focuses on early stage. It's perfect. It's a perfect fit. Now, I might also ask, who's your target customer? Is it pizza shops? Is it laundry? Or is it high-tech startups? Because what I want to try to do is start to narrow that funnel and really make sure I accurately understand who that target customer is. Next question is going to be around pricing. Well, we know what Slidebean pricing is today, but think early on, what's your pricing and how do you know? The next thing we think about is geography. Is it all companies? Is it globally? Or is it specific regions? For a company like Slidebean, it's probably global, but something to think about as you think about that narrowing of the funnel. So now Slidebean as a company has been evolving over time, and they have a new service offering, right? So now they'd have to do their TAM of both the product and the service. Are they the same target? Are they different targets? Is the pricing different? So now the TAM in this situation, you'd add up the TAM of the product offering, the TAM of the service offering, and that would be the combined TAM, and you'd do the math. And you do that all bottoms up. That's how we do Slidebean. By the way, as we talk about TAM, let's also hit upon what investors, venture capital investors, are typically looking for. They're often looking for companies that are going into $1 billion market. That $1 billion market minimum is defined as your market. It's going to be based on your pricing. Why is that? They want to make sure you have enough room to maneuver, the market's big enough. If you just get that 1%, that means you're doing $10 million in annual recurring revenue. It's a big enough market to support a venture-backed startup. So there's a lot of variations to startups, and what I want you to do is that I want you to challenge your thinking and challenge your assumptions. This model works again and again across industries, whether you're B2B, B2C, D2C, whatever markets you're going into, it works. Let's say you wanted to build a new social network. Well, what are the total number of users you're targeting times what you could do for advertising? How are you going to make money? You need to think those issues through. Are you going to be on pay-per-click, or is it going to be cost per thousand, CPM? How are you estimating it? What's your premium you're going to charge for all of this? So the same model works. How many customers? What's the revenue, or what's the pricing per customer or per whatever unit you're selling? Let's say you wanted to build a new product or device. Same model works. You want to build a new e-commerce company. TAM calculation works. You want to do DTC. TAM calculation this way works. You want to build a company to compete against Airbnb and VRBO. Same model works. What's that target number of users? What's the pricing going to be? Okay, so that's it. What's a great TAM? It's not top down. It's not the size of the problem, and it's not the size of the market today. It's not what everybody else is doing, what all of your competitors are going to be doing. It's going to be your TAM. What's your TAM? It's the number of your target customers times your price. Remember to show your work, cite the data, and also talk about the geography that you're estimating with it. So Caya and Slidebean, thanks for having us on. At Dreamit, we work with startups in secure tech, urban tech, and health tech every single day. If you're interested in learning more about us and seeing the content we create, please check out Dreamit Ventures on YouTube. Thanks for watching.